or the low double figures, I should say. A rain warning in force, first thing for Northern Ireland because of some slow-moving outbreaks of rain. 20 to 30 millimetres could cause some localised flooding. But otherwise, for much of the UK, it's more of the same. Sunny spells, heavy showers, and in the south, perhaps some rumbles of thunder and the odd hail shower. On the cool side, once again, 18 to 22 Celsius typically up and down the country, and it's going to feel cool with a fresh breeze down towards the southwest. Now into Thursday evening, the showers continue for some time. Eventually, clearer spells will break out here and there, and it looks like for many it's a dry start to Friday at least, with some brighter spells first thing. But again, it's on the cool side. Temperatures holding up at 11 or 13 Celsius in main urban areas, but in the single figures in the countryside. Friday morning then starts off with some sunshine. Increasingly, showers will build, initially western coasts and then more widely through the day. And Friday is another showery day as well as Saturday, but things do dry up by Sunday.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. Now, NATO summit over in Madrid. Boris Johnson has called for members to dig deeper and pay more. Never mind that, though, because Ben Wallace, our Defence Secretary, says that the money we're spending here on defence is not enough. I mean, everywhere I look, it seems to be calls for more and more and more money. Let's park where do we get this money from for a moment. And let me ask you, do we need to be spending more on defence in this country? Did the cuts that were made go too deep? How do we overturn that? Speaking of overturning, you'll be familiar by now with Roe v. Wade in the States was overturned last week. And when it comes to how much bodily autonomy women should have, a Tory MP here has pointed out that this is a topic which needs proper political debate. Given that another body is involved, of course, I speak of abortion. Lucky for that Tory MP, he says we need debate. Well, this is indeed a debate programme. I'll open it up to my panel and, of course, to you. Where do you stand on all that? And fresh calls for proportional representation. Should we have it in this country? Do you think that Parliament reflects the way that the public vote as it stands with first past the post? If the answer to that is no, is proportional representation the answer? We'll have all of that to come, but first let's have a look at the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. The top stories. The Prime Minister says it's an incredible day for NATO as Finland and Sweden are officially invited to become members of the military alliance. It was made possible after Turkey withdrew objections as leaders met for a summit in Madrid. Meanwhile, the United States has announced plans to boost its military presence across Europe in response to changing threats. Boris Johnson said the move will make the alliance stronger against threats and that Vladimir Putin is getting more NATO, not less.
Finland and Sweden have been decades and decades the most resistant to military alignment, countries that have treasured their neutrality. The fact that they have decided to join NATO says two very important things. One, it shows how concerned they are about the aggression of Vladimir Putin, how dangerous they feel he is. But what it also shows is that NATO is fundamentally a defensive alliance. These are peaceful countries, a very important day in the sense that we're seeing expansion of the alliance, which is exactly the opposite of what Putin wanted. He wanted less NATO, he's getting more.
Well, NATO's Secretary-General says the decision to invite Finland and Sweden demonstrates its door remains open.
Today, at the summit, NATO leaders decided a fundamental shift in our defence and deterrence to respond to a new security reality. We will strengthen our forward defences. We will enhance our battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance up to brigade levels. We will transform the NATO response force and increase the number of high readiness forces to well over 300,000.
Here, a royal source says the Prince of Wales would never again handle large cash donations for his charities. For the first time, a senior palace source has responded to reports that emerged at the weekend that Prince Charles was handed €3 million in cash in a bag by a Qatari sheikh. Clarence House says the money was passed immediately to his charities and all the right processes were followed. The Court of Appeal has today ruled the decision to end life support treatment for a 12-year-old boy should be reconsidered. Earlier this month, the High Court judge concluded Archie Battersby was dead and said doctors should lawfully stop providing treatment. But his parents appealed against that decision, saying their son's heart was still beating. 3 Court of Appeal judges today ruled there should be another High Court hearing. A date, though, hasn't yet been set for that. The policing minister has accused the Mayor of London of being asleep at the wheel over failures by the Metropolitan Police. Kit Malthouse was speaking after the force was placed under special measures by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, following a series of scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. Mr Malthouse said Sergeant Javid needs to stop blaming others.
The Mayor has been asleep at the wheel and is letting the city down. Teenage homicides in London were the highest they've ever been in the last year, and 23% of all knife crime takes place in London, despite it having only 15% of the UK population. The Mayor must acknowledge that he has profound questions to answer. He cannot be passive and continue as he has. He must get a grip.
And lastly, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have paid tribute to Dame Deborah James, describing her as an inspirational and unfalteringly brave woman whose legacy will live on. The podcaster, known as Bowel Babe, died yesterday at the age of 40, 5.5 years after first being diagnosed with incurable bowel cancer. Donations to the fund she set up for cancer research have now hit £6.9 million.
I was messaging her, and she was messaging back. She had lots of followers, but she was just so kind and so sweet, and was giving me advice when I was in hospital. Saying, what was your, what was the size of your tumour? And actually, when we met up, she was so lovely. She was like, "Come in the picture, let's take a selfie." And she was so sweet. We were comparing sort of tumour sizes. She was like, "Oh, mine was 6.5 centimetres," and I was like, "Oh God, mine was 7." And the one thing she said was that I am so pleased that you are the reason why I do this work, because you are an early stage survivor.
You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You are with GB News, where now it's time for Dewbs & Co.
Thanks, Polly. And wow, what an inspirational lady Deborah is, isn't she? So much good work, attention that she's brought to the horrible disease that is cancer. So, of course, thoughts with all of her family. And also, by the way, all of those and the families of those that are suffering that don't perhaps have that profile, because what an awful disease cancer is. Let's hope that one day we can get to the point where it really doesn't affect as many people as it currently does. Right, well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, my panel, Daniel Moylan, the former advisor to Boris Johnson, now Tory life peer in the House of Lords, the author and academic Frank Furedi, and political consultant Emma Burnell. Good evening, all of you three. I haven't seen you for a while, Frank. Been on holiday, Italy. Look at him, ladies and gentlemen. Coming back, he looks very dashing. Welcome to all of you. And you know the drill. Oh, and you, Daniel, as well, by the way. You look dashing too, sorry. And you, Emma. I've started something now, haven't I? God, I've started something. You know the drill, don't you, on Dewbs & Co. It's not just about us here. It's about you at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? Paulette has been in touch. Said she loves this show. She thinks it gets better and better every night. So thank you, Paulette. Thanks for your loyalty as well and sticking with us and watching. Someone else, however, says, Michelle, have you come to work in your jammies? No, I have not, you cheeky so-and-so. This is my lovely summer dress. I thought I looked quite nice. I'm telling everyone else how dashing they look. I thought I looked all right as well, but no, that viewer's having none of it. Anyway, get in touch with me. Let me know your thoughts on the topics tonight. We'll be talking about, of course, NATO and defence spending. Talking about bodily autonomy, especially when it comes to women. I mean, these conversations, they only ever seem to happen about women, and don't really sit here pontificating about what men can and can't do we? But that's probably a topic for another day. And also proportional representation. Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. You can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews if that's your thing. And you can subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't already. Many of you watch that way, by the way. Good evening to you if you're there. If you're heading out, don't worry, you can take me with you. We are on DAB Plus Radio, so wherever you are very welcome tonight. Now, top story, Boris Johnson, of course, has been meeting other world leaders on the opening day of the NATO summit in Madrid today. He's urged fellow NATO members to dig deep and increase the spending targets beyond the current level of 2% of GDP, of course, to ward off the threat from Russia. But the Prime Minister is resisting public pressure from his own Defence Secretary and the head of the Army to increase Britain's own military budget. Spending has apparently effectively been cut due to inflation, and Boris has so far refused to spend more on defence. Should he? Frank, I'm going to start with you because rumour has it you've just written a new book about Ukraine.
That's right, yes.
Your thoughts on all of this?
It's a tricky question because everybody's asking for more money. Every single department needs more cash. At the same time, I do think that defense is going to be taken more seriously, and we should be giving a bit more cash to the defense sector. But what I do worry about is that just simply by giving more money to defense will not necessarily make us more ready for war. You can see very clearly what's happened to the NHS or education. You put in a lot of money, and very often a lot of that money is wasted. And we've seen over the last few years that the procurement policy of the defense sector has been very poor. We've kind of bought weapons that have not been up to the job in Afghanistan and elsewhere. And what I would like to see is a proper military strategy that's aligned with our geopolitical world at the moment being crafted in the first place. And once we know exactly where we stand, how to get ready for war, then I think the financial issues should follow rather than the other way around. Because if we were to just simply increase the amount of money we put in defense, I think it would be wasted.
Yeah, and one of the things Ben Wallace wants is more kind of personnel. I make it a bit crass and I say boots on the ground. It's not necessarily that, but more personnel, because we saw huge cuts, didn't we, to army personnel. Daniel, where do you stand?
Yeah, well, I think we do need to spend more, and the army has become too small. And Frank is absolutely right. Defence procurement has not been a great success story. He's also right, I think, in that we need to have a plan before we spend the money. But we also need to think not just about our geopolitical interests, but also about what type of warfare we might be fighting in the future. I mean, we've seen tanks in Ukraine, and we were all worried about tanks, and they don't seem to have been as effective. But artillery has been used very effectively. But should we be looking, in fact, at electronic warfare, cyber warfare? I'm not a defence expert, I don't know. But we need to know what we're going to spend the money on And we need, as Frank says, to do the procurement a great deal more smartly. But I have no problem with us spending more.
As long as it's effective spend.
We all want it to be effective.
Emma?
I'm afraid, really boringly, I'm going to agree with the other panellists. I know that usually my role here is to bring the lefty other view, but I couldn't agree more. I think what's really important and what needs to be thought much more about, we always hear this term about some parts of the civil service, education, health, of the blob. It's never applied to defence, and I think it should be equally. I think there is a real fear from some politicians of saying no to those interests in the army who are just as you know, have their own particular specialisms and therefore are going to push those specialisms, rather than looking on a broad, whole, strategic basis. And that's what needs to happen. I am not a pacifist. I'm dovish, but I'm not a pacifist. So therefore, you have to accept that money needs to be spent on defence. But we, like all departments, we need to have a good, strong state rather than simply a state where we throw money, good money after bad.
And we have the ultimate defence there, don't we, with Trident? Are we all in favour of retaining that?
I think, well, I'm in favour of retaining that, but there's a more fundamental problem, which is that in British society, the military has lost a lot of its prestige. A lot of service personnel feel awkward about wearing their uniforms in public. We often look down upon soldiers as somehow not, having a vocation that's not as good as other kind of jobs. And I think that
who does that? I don't know anyone that looks down on soldiers and thinks that that's not a good job. If anything, I think people look at soldiers with awe, because most people are not brave enough to do that job.
Well, I think you and I have that attitude, but there's a very powerful sense of estrangement from a military culture. And that's why even the army itself advises many of its soldiers not to walk around in their uniforms. In the past, that's what you would do. Whereas now, for example, you invite getting into fights in many of the garrison towns in this country. The point I'm really making is that we've not taken the whole ethos of what used to be called the warrior ethos seriously. A lot of young boys who go to school never get the kind of introduction to being a cadet or other kind of activities that will make them interested in this as a real profession. And in particular, I think the value of service and duty, which is what the military is all about, the really valuable values, are not held in as high esteem as they should be. And I think we have got to somehow create a culture that underpins defense, which is based upon the fact that we are, all of us, in it together, and we support our military in a way that is, not like in the United States, where you go to an airport in the United States and soldiers are the first ones that get on the airplane, and where people, have a respect and they kind of praise them for the service that they provided. Whereas here, we just take our military for granted.
Interesting point. Emma, by the way, did I see you pull a strange face when I asked if it was all in favour of Trident?
I don't think Trident's worth the money. I think there are much, much better ways of defending our country. It is my one lefty shibboleth that I have left is that I am a unilateral Islamist. I just don't think, I think it's neither safe nor effective. And I think we've seen that because I haven't seen any wars being stopped in my lifetime while we've had Trident.
But then you will be very familiar with a lot of the reservation about going too hard, if you like, against Russia is the fear and the threat of the deterrent from Russia. So the whole kind of, we don't want to start a nuclear war, that, for me, has been the dominant force, or one of the dominant forces throughout this whole conversation, which tells me that actually nuclear weapons, of course, who wouldn't want to live in a world where it was free of nuclear weapons? Anyone would want that world, but that's not a real world. We're in the real world. People do have nuclear weapons. So for me, actually, I've heard the conversation around nuclear deterrent and thought it's reinforced in my mind that we absolutely need Trident. Why would you not think it's an effective deterrent?
Because we still end up, we've been at war most of the years of my life. So I haven't seen it stopping any wars, and that's what I was told it was going to do.
We've not been at war. Who have we been at war with?
Iraq, Afghanistan, for the last 20 years. We're now assisting in the war in Ukraine. Nothing has stopped.
We're not at war, are we?
It also stopped the Cold War from becoming a hot war.
So they say, but I think economics had quite a lot to do with that.
It may well have something to do with it, but the very fact that both sides knew that they had this active deterrent prevented conflict in Europe for 2 or 3 decades, and that was a very precious 2 or 3 decades where we could have had horrible wars occurring. But I think, whether we like it or not, it is the only deterrent that will stop someone like Putin from going much further than he's already gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where do you stand on Trident, Daniel?
Well, I think it's both Emma and Frank have got a point, actually. I would renew Trident, but you have to acknowledge Trident is not an effective day-to-day weapon. It's not going to operate as a weapon. It works as a deterrent. So you're paying a lot of money, and Emma's right, it is expensive. You're paying a lot of money effectively for an insurance policy rather than for a weapon. But if you look at what Putin has done in the cities of Ukraine, as far as I can tell from the television pictures, I mean, what a nuclear bomb does is it can wipe out a whole city. He's wiped out whole cities. In fact, there are whole cities, as far as you can tell, that have simply ceased to exist as
but nuclear,
through the use of artillery. You've got radiation considerations as well, of course, but you see what he's achieved simply through the use of artillery. That is where, that is where the actual active force, military force, is being shown. Trident is nuclear weapons are at best an insurance policy, an expensive one, but one I think we have to pay for.
Yeah, and I think anyone that's been to somewhere like Hiroshima in Japan and you see what's left, I mean, you say there's not much of it left, but when you actually see the damage that a nuclear weapon did, and I mean, this is obviously decades ago, much more advanced now these days, I dread to think what they would do. And of course, everyone wants to live in a world where you don't need nuclear weapons. They're barbaric of the highest order, but we do not live in that world. And while people like Putin or whoever has got them, you absolutely, in my view anyway, need them. Carmen's emailed in and said, Frank is absolutely right. My husband is in the reserve army and he's been told not to wear his uniform outside of the barracks for fear of attack. She says, army personnel are the worst treated in this country. I've told him he shouldn't even bother defending this country. Goodness me. What do you think to that?
Well, I think that's a very common response. And I know a lot of ex-military personnel who were really committed to service and duty, who feel demoralized by the way they've been treated. And they really feel that they've been ostracized because of their profession. And I think it's for that reason we have to go back to the basics and teach our young people that serving the country is a very noble enterprise. And we've got to do much more than that. Otherwise, we'll simply throw money at an army without giving it the moral authority it needs to fight on our behalf.
Would you want your son to join the army, Emma? If you had a son, would you want him to?
Slightly worried. I've got a son I didn't know about. Would I want my son? Oh, God, that's a really hard question. Not because of the respect thing. I think that is quite an important factor. I think there's a real class issue around this. I think most of the kids who go off and become squaddies, proper soldiers, are working class kids, and it's a great route, and it used to be a really great route for them to have a proper profession, a proper career. And the more that we look down on them, the more that feels like a sort of a very class-based, sneery attitude, which I can't bear myself. Would I want my own son to join up if I had one? I mean, I'm thinking about my lovely nephew now, and I wouldn't want to see him go off to war. I'd hate that. But I'd be very proud of him if that's what he chose to do.
Daniel, thoughts?
Well, I think it is a great profession. Frank has a point, and I think we see this also in the way in which we allow veterans, former soldiers, to be prosecuted for things where it's very difficult to see that they had a personal responsibility and where the events took place many decades before. But I agree with Frank. We need to value our armed forces a great deal more than we do.
And it might be an idea to consider bringing back some form of national service.
I wouldn't go
not just for boys, but also for girls.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go
not necessarily in the old form.
Military national service or just a general community service or whatever?
We can have a debate on that. It could have a community aspect and a military aspect to it. But I do think we need some sense of solidarity becoming part of young people's education. Because at the moment, they lead such fragmented, privatized lives. Mm-hmm. And they never actually meet as equals. And I like to see people from all classes being in the same unit, being in the same organization, so they get to know each other. And we avoid having that sneering anti-working class sentiment that Emma has been describing.
Right, well, I've just made a note to self. We shall debate that one day, because people do often say, don't they, about the youth of today, bring back national service. And I've got a little boy, and the thought of him kind of packing his little bag and going off to war, I'm like, oh, I mean, OK, granted, he is only tiny, so it's irrelevant. But I don't know, I don't think it'd be for me. But the concept of a almost mandatory, you leave school or college or university, whatever, and you have to do a year or 2 year in a particular programme, whether that's got a military aspect or community aspect, I think that is a topic worthy of discussion. So we'll mental note of that, and we'll revisit another day. Brian has been in touch saying, Michelle, people seem to think there is a magic money tree. We hear it all the time, spend more on defence, NHS, social care, universal credit. Basically, he's asking, don't people understand that the UK is in massive debt? Well, you tell me, do you understand that? Are you calling for more and more money? Where do we get this money from, and how should we prioritise it? Right, going to take a quick break. When we come back, do women have an absolute right to bodily autonomy? Of course, this is basically off the back of the whole kind of abortion conversation. People might be sitting there thinking, what's kind of Roe v. Wade in the States got to do with us? Well, this has all come about because a Tory MP basically has had this conversation. He thinks there should be a political debate on the matter when it comes to bodily autonomy when another body is included. So, of course, you know, we're a debate programme. So we'll step up, we'll have that debate, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, my panel. We've got Daniel Moylan, a former advisor to Boris Johnson and now a Conservative life peer in the House of Lords. The author and academic, Frank Furedi, and political consultant, Emma Burnell. Lots of you getting in contact about that last topic. Rodney says, Michelle, the reason why soldiers do not wear uniforms in public is not because people look down on the forces, but because of fears of attacks, such as in the case of Lee Rigby. That sentiment is coming through quite a bit, actually, that people are saying it's more a nervousness that they might be attacked if they are seen out and about in their uniform. What a sad state of affairs, isn't it? If you're brave enough to represent this country in that way, I've got to be honest, I don't think I have got that in me, just putting that out there. So I've got lots of respect for people that have got that. What a sad state of affairs that you feel afraid to display who you are for fear of being attacked because of it, purely because of your desire to serve the country and make it a better, safer place. Right, let's move on. The ruling over Roe v. Wade in America has caused debate here in the UK. I've got to say, personally, I stayed away from it a little bit because I'm not a fan of, feeling the need to, this has happened in America, so let me sit here and interfere in the UK. I don't really appreciate it, and I don't really appreciate it when it happens in the reverse either. But today, I've kind of strayed from that because the Tory MP, Danny Kruger, has raised the matter in Parliament here yesterday.
That women have an absolute right of bodily autonomy in this matter, whereas I think in the case of abortion, that right is qualified by the fact that another body is involved. But we can disagree on that question. That's the purpose. We disagree on that question, and I offer to members who are trying to talk me down that this is a proper topic for political debate.
Yes, Danny, it's a proper topic for debate. Well, if you can't have a proper debate on a proper topic on Dewbs and Co, where can you do it?
Right.
Emma, where do you stand on it all?
I am fully in favour of a woman's right to choose. Nobody should be forced to carry a baby they don't want to have to term. There are term limits for abortions, and it is extremely rare for a woman to have an abortion in the latter part of a pregnancy. And when that happens, it's almost always due to the fact that it is a medical reason for that abortion. We should have much greater education, sex education for younger women, for people in schools, much better and more clear education around birth control. Abortions should be safe, rare and legal. And that is simply the bottom line. And the truth is, and we all know this is the truth, you make abortion illegal, you don't stop abortion, you kill women.
Well, Daniel says no, it's not true. What's not true, Daniel?
Well, first of all, I'm glad Emma put it the way she did, because she's agreeing that women don't have bodily autonomy in the sense in which, they have the absolute right to do whatever they want. And it's true of men as well. Men and women don't have bodily autonomy in this country. And the law takes an interest. And she said there are term limits, and presumably she agrees those term limits should be observed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I'm not denying that.
Those are legal limitations put on abortions that Emma accepts. And I thought she was going to say she was in favour of bodily autonomy, but she's accepting a position that I would say, which is bodily autonomy doesn't exist. And the assertion to say that there is a right, whether it's a woman or a man, to bodily autonomy is pure assertion. There's no argument behind it whatsoever, and there's no legal basis for it. And what Danny Kruger on top of that is saying, that in this case, in the case of abortion specifically, it's not just that you don't have bodily autonomy, but there is another life involved, and that is true as well. And there has to be some weight given to that, You can't just blanket out totally, that's all.
Well, I disagree. I think that we don't have bodily autonomy, but we should. Because it seems to me that autonomy is not something you can have on Monday and Tuesday, but not on Wednesday and Thursday. And the minute you have a selective approach towards bodily autonomy, man or woman, then what you're doing is essentially interfering in people's private decision-making. And when you begin to politicize private decision-making, what you fundamentally call into question is people's ability to act in accordance with their conscience. Now, I take the freedom of conscience to be the most foundational freedom that we have in an enlightened society. And we understand that when you begin to politicize people's private decision-making, what you're doing is you're moving towards a kind of soft totalitarianism. Now, one side of the culture was doing that already when they say the personal is political, when they tell us what to think and what words to use. Now, the other side is saying that we think that women are either too stupid or too irresponsible or are not able to make the choices that is in accordance with their own inclination, their own circumstances. There's also a bigger problem here, because if any woman is forced to have a child that she doesn't really want, she cannot be expected to take responsibility for that. It wasn't her decision. It was somebody else who decided for her. And there's nothing worse, from my experience, than having children within a circumstance where those kids are not really wanted.
Let me just clarify.
Frank seems to be suggesting that it wasn't the woman's decision. That would be true if the woman had been raped or coerced into conceiving the child. I understand that. But he seems to be saying that applies even to a woman who decided to become pregnant and then doesn't change her mind. Is that what he's saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. I know women, who have this great loving relationship, and then they discover that the man they've been in love with has died. Or they discover...
And then there's the question of the fact that you have another life involved.
If we're going to talk about bodily autonomy...
But just 2 seconds, can I just clarify what you're saying? So are you saying, Frank, that you believe in entire bodily autonomy to the point where a woman can abort a child at any point in the pregnancy?
And for any reason.
Well, the point is that, as you all know, 98% of abortions, 99% of abortions are taken at a very early point in a woman's pregnancy.
No, but I'm not talking about that. I'm asking you about your... Never mind statistically who does what where. Is your position that if a woman wants an abortion at any point of her pregnancy, so up until 40-odd weeks, whatever, for pretty much any reason, then that's her right?
I do believe that autonomy is autonomy, and once we begin to put conditions on it, we lose...
So yes or...
Absolutely.
Sorry to press you.
Absolutely, yes.
So you think... So, for example, I get pregnant, I find out that my fella has been cheating on me, he's a bit of a wrong-un, I'm 38 weeks pregnant, and I think to myself, I don't want his kid. In fact, actually, I want to hurt him. He's hurt me by cheating on me. I want to get my own back, so I'm going to abort his child at 38 weeks. You'd be in favour of that dynamic?
Because I trust women. Women are responsible individuals.
But what about the right of the child?
Well, it seems to me that there are two issues in conflict with each other. There's a woman who's carrying that child, who's developed her conscience, her responsible sense of responsibility. And it's not a child that she's carrying, because the child is someone that's born after pregnancy. There's first a fetus, and then there's...
definitional matter.
Well, are you saying that an embryo is the same as a child?
What I'm saying is that at a certain point, and the point gets earlier all the time, the child is perfectly viable outside the womb, and you can have these definitional arguments. I'm happy to...
I'm not having I'm having a moral argument.
Why do we always talk about women's bodily autonomy? Here's a suggestion. This is a debate programme. Daniel, let me finish, please. Let's debate a new idea. If we want to stop abortion, how about compulsory vasectomies for every man under the age of 40? That's taking away bodily autonomy and stopping abortion. That's a similar idea, isn't it?
That would also take away voluntary pregnancy, wouldn't it? And
no, because they're reversible.
Contraception fails all the time.
Vasectomy reversible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, I didn't even know that. But you're taking away...
Well, I'm sure an abortion hurts too, but, bodily autonomy.
You're taking away the opportunity for people to have children voluntarily. Is that what...
No, I'm not.
If the
it's perfectly reversible.
Want to write in and say that they're up for that.
It's a way of stopping abortion. That's what you want, isn't it?
No.
Why does men's bodily autonomy matter more than women's?
There's something very odd about this, isn't there? Because most political arguments are about choosing between things that people think are good. So we just had one. Some people say, your viewers wrote in, spend more on defence, because defence is good. And others would say, no, you should spend more on the NHS, because the NHS is good, and that's what So we have those arguments.
Absolutely.
Here we have an argument where actually nobody is willing to say that abortion is good. Nobody is saying, let's have a target of having more abortions because they're so great, we want more of them.
No, you missed the argument.
Everyone accepts.
Let's have more wanted pregnancies.
Every abortion.
Let's have fewer poor children. Let's have fewer unwanted children. That's a good thing. That's a great thing.
It's a tragedy for the mother, the child, and for other people involved.
It's not always a tragedy. Sometimes it's not.
And nobody thinks you should have targets for having more. So you're in a very strange position.
I think there should be targets for having fewer unwanted pregnancies. Absolutely.
Nobody wants.
Right, hang on, Frank, come on.
Yeah, abortion. There's nothing good about abortion, but there's everything that's good about the right to make choices about your life. And in supporting the right to make choices, that is a good in and of itself, because the freedom of conscience and the freedom of private decision-making is foundational in our society.
You don't accept that you have the freedom of private decision-making if you're going to go out and harm other people and whatever.
No,
you accept the limitations.
We're talking about a family life.
All of this argument is about whether you're harming somebody else.
No, it's not.
It's all an argument. You want to insist it's a private decision, and Danny Kruger is saying, no, it's not an entirely private decision because there's another life involved.
He's saying that I, as a politician, will decide rather than a woman about what the abortion will be. So you've got a politician here who hasn't got to live with the consequences of any of the issues that he's discussing. He's saying that this is a political debate. We've got to depoliticize abortion. It shouldn't be a political discussion.
You can only depoliticize by changing the law.
I think he means the term limits. And I'm actually quite astonished that you think, because you said something like, you know, it's a fetus basically until it's born. Is that, I don't want to put words into your mouth, so I'm just checking. Is that what you mean?
Well, what I was saying was that, because Daniel was talking about a child, and I was saying that what we're talking about is not the killing of a child or the termination of a child, because the child is something that evolves at a certain point, you know, sort of after pregnancy.
But let me ask you this. Have you got any experience of premature babies?
I do. I had a son who was premature, yeah.
So you will know, I mean, just for transparency, I ran into problems at 28 weeks in my pregnancy, which is very early for those of you that are not familiar with the timeframes. And my little boy was born very prematurely, and I spent a long time in what's called a NICU, a neonatal intensive care unit. And I encountered babies that were as young as 23 weeks that can go on and live. And when I hear people say, well, it's not a child until the umbilical cord's cut and it's not a child until it's born, I feel so strongly that that is not the case. And what I would say to you is when you say, well, this woman's going to be forced to have this kid and she won't want the kid, we have an adoption programme in this country. And we have many, many people, some people will be watching this, that would be desperate to provide a loving home to a child that for whatever reason can't remain with its birth mother.
But you know, I know a lot of women who have given up their children for adoption, who are actually morally destroyed by that particular event. They never forget that child that they had to give up. It may be okay for the person who's doing the adopting, but for that woman to have been forced into a situation where she gave pregnancy to a child she did not want, and then having to give it up, is almost like a double blow.
There are lots of women who regret having had an abortion.
There are, but the point is, we go back to what the point is, it's choice. People make choices and they have to live with the consequences of those choices. And I would argue that in a civilized society, we trust our people to make the right kind of choices. Sometimes they make silly choices, but unless we presume in favor of choice making, then
but who protects the child in all of this? Because Emma, I am almost out of time, which is a real shame because I really could spend a lot more on this, and I want to give the last word to you. But you know, some of the things that I'm uncomfortable with in this country, we have legal limits, term limits. So, but in this country, for example, you can abort a child right up until pretty much the due date if it's got a condition, cleft palate, cleft lip, club foot. Now, I don't know the people's familiarity with some of these conditions, but I personally think that is appalling because I look at these conditions and these are fixable, manageable conditions to kill a child. And this is where many people disagree on this conversation because what is a child and what's not a child? To me, having seen a very premature child and children, plural, I do regard termination of, to me, what is a child at stages like 24 plus weeks for whatever reason, except really extreme scenarios. You know, if the mum's about to die or the child, whatever, if there's an extreme scenario, that's different. But for things like when we start talking about club foot, cleft lip, cleft palate, they're not reasons to kill a child up to the due date. But
I don't know the stats and I'd love to see them. I imagine that's exceptionally rare.
But I
think the question is, yes, there are term limits, and that is probably right. And if abortion is to be legal, Daniel is right on one thing, which is that we have to have laws that say how abortion is done in the same way as any other medical procedure is regulated. And if we're going to have abortion as a medical procedure, then there has to be regulation. Regulation is ultimately part of a democratic system. Yeah. So that has to happen in that way. And those very, very broad terms are set by politicians, but they should be set by politicians not based on emotive language and blackmail of women, but on what the people who are the medical experts say is the right course forward that works for primarily mothers or women, because those are the people who the burden is on. And that has to be the primary source. And if you don't want them to be the primary source, then invest a lot more money in sex education and pregnancy prevention, because that's how you stop abortion.
See, this debate could rumble on and on and on, but only for time reasons. I have to draw it to a close. And I have to say, it's nice to be able to have a respectful debate on what can be, for many people at least, quite an emotional subject. So that's what we need more of in this society, I think, more respectful debate on important matters rather than this constant falling out. I'll have some of your thoughts on that topic after the break. I'll leave you going into the break with a simple thought. When it comes to men, I mean, we talk about vasectomies and all the rest of it, there are these simple things called condoms. I mean,
they're only 96% effective.
Well, yeah, that'd be a start. Anyway, I'll move on, shall I? When we come back from the break, we'll be talking about politics. You know, are you engaged in the political system? Do you vote? Have you always voted? Is it time for first past the post, our current electoral system, to be replaced with proportional representation? We'll be looking at that after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show, the crumbling cops. After the Met Police was put into special measures following systemic failures, former Chief Superintendent Palm Sandu will be here to shine a light on whether this is the final nail in the coffin for the struggling force. All the stories of the vaccine injured and bereaved now form part of the government inquiry into COVID. We'll be taking a closer look at the small print. Plus, the Statman is back. Jamie Jenkins will be separating the facts from the fiction and is on a mission to get all of us looking beyond the smoke and mirrors. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show tonight from 8 o'clock.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Keeping me company is my panel, Daniel Moylan, our former advisor to Boris Johnson and now Tory life peer in the House of Lords, the author and academic Frank Furedi, and the political consultant Emma Burnell. I've got to say that entire break was spent with us lot, continuing that conversation just about who decides what and where when it comes to life generally. Should there be boundaries? Who should define the boundaries? It's a fascinating topic. Sometimes, I tell you, I'm really tempted to take whole shows and go deep into some topics. I might do that, you know, in the summer when Parliament is in recess and the politicians are not there messing things up. I might get into some decent topics like this. Anyway, coming up at 7 o'clock, you've got Nigel Farage. Nigel, good evening. What have you got for us?
Good evening. Well, I can't match the spirited debate that you're having there in the studio, but what I can do
is to say that GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has secured an exclusive 10-minute interview with the Prime Minister from the summit at Madrid, the NATO summit, and he asks the Prime Minister in that interview, and indeed we will debate on my show at 7 o'clock, should we be spending more on defence, and in particular, should we not be cutting the British Army in the way in which we are? You'll see the interview with Darren asking Boris Johnson those very questions. I'll pick up from there.
Sounds good. By the way, Nigel, proportional representation, we'll be debating that in a sec. You're passionate about this?
Yes, I have been for a long time. I felt that the House of Commons does not represent where the country is on so many things. The Brexit referendum rather proved how out of touch Westminster is with the people. We vote negatively in this country. We say, well, we dislike this party a little bit less than we dislike the other party. Millions of people who would vote in elections just don't bother because they don't feel represented at all. And I led a party in 2015 that got 4 million votes and 1 seat in the House of Commons. I mean, what a complete and utter nonsense that is, and I'm pleased to say that Andy Burnham has now spoken up and says that Labour should commit to proportional representation. Interestingly, YouGov polling from March now shows many more people support PR than support our current first past the post, and I believe it's a change that the Tories will resist, but I believe it's a change that is coming.
Well, we're just about to get into it here, Nigel. Thanks for your thoughts on that. Daniel, I'll start with you. Proportional representation, yes, no?
Well, there's a deeper question here. We've moved to a system in the last 20 or 30 years where people definitely feel they're voting for a party rather than for a person. In fact, legally, we don't vote for parties in general elections. We vote for an individual to represent us. And up until the rot started in the 1980s, up until the 1970s or 80s, you couldn't even have your party membership on the ballot paper if you were a candidate. You could only have your name, because we were never meant to be voting for a party, but always for the right individual. Now we think we're voting for parties. We've suddenly shifted without any change in the legal basis. We all think we're voting for parties, and somehow it's unfair if your party doesn't get the fair share of seats. But that is actually something we should be resisting, because it gives a huge amount of power to parties. And all we'll be doing is entrenching that and letting them choose who our MPs are, because they put the lists together, and we just tick a box with the party.
Daniel
we need
Moylan.
to be reversing the power of parties and going back to a system which actually, going back to thinking about this as who is the right person to represent me, which is what our system is actually based on, and why it's better than PR.
You know I like you, but come on now. Aren't you just saying this because basically you know that if we had PR in this country, it'd be the Tories and Labour that'd be absolutely battered. It'd be them that would stand to lose.
No, I don't think that's the reason at all. That's why I raised it as a much more important issue about how we see our democracy and who it is we're actually choosing. And I really don't want to live, I would live, but it'd be less attractive to live in a country where all of the candidates are just chosen on party lists and put together in secret rooms, when at least you have choices, you have the possibility of independent candidates, and people have real opportunities to vote for individuals to represent their areas. That's the system that we've always had, and that's the system which legally we still have. Go and have a party system if you want. End up like it is true. I'm not elected. I don't actually even have a vote in general elections. Let's get that out on the table straight away. Nonetheless, I live in this country. And you want the Parliament, you want the House of Commons to look just like the House of Lords, where you have people put in by parties. That's absolutely fine. You go for proportional representation. It's a very bad move, and it undermines and damages our democracy.
But already with our existing system, secret list is what it's all about. So you look at the last by-election in Wakefield, both candidates were parachuted into Wakefield. They had nothing to do.
There was a conservative process in Wakefield,
but
and we always do.
No, that's not true. The person that was chosen by the Conservative Party was not the one that the local Conservatives wished to have. It was the one that Central Office sort of promoted. And I know this for a fact. But the really important
vote,
the really important thing here is that politics is not working at the moment. And one of the reasons why it's not working is because there are millions of people without a voice. And one of the tragedies that we have is, as Nigel was saying earlier on, we're tending to vote against parties rather than for parties.
That's the British way.
And that it seems to me to be a fact of life now. If you look at the by-elections, people were tactically voting against a particular party rather than for a particular party. And that to me is not a good thing. Now, in order to meet Daniel's objection, we can have a smarter system where we combine both the virtues of proportional representation with also having a number of parliamentary seats. And that's a practice that's been adopted by a number of European countries. But I think what I really would like to see is a greater opportunity for the smaller parties to make a bit of headway so that new parties with new ideas don't end up being marginalized for forever in the way that is the case at the moment. So that a party like UKIP, which was a very serious force in numerical terms, doesn't become anonymous as far as Westminster is concerned. So to that extent, I don't think it will necessarily re-energize politics, but it will create a level playing field.
Emma?
I get very frustrated at how much time we spend talking about how we elect politicians. AV has its benefits, it has its disbenefits. First past the post, the same. I worry about some forms of electoral reform that what you'll end up with is a whole bunch of people who appeal to the middle ground because they are everybody's second preference. And that means that what you don't get are the really interesting range of political views that are represented when you do have safe seats. So way over on the right, you've got, say, Peter Bone. Way over on the left, say, Jeremy Corbyn. And there are people in the country who feel better represented, even if they're not their seat, because people with their politics are in Parliament. And if we go to a system of PR, that won't be quite so true for those people. However, more people will feel that their vote is counted because they don't live in a safe seat. There are huge benefits and disbenefits to all systems. None of them are perfect. What just slightly annoys me in the endless row of this conversation is we actually need to think much more interestingly, not about how we elect people, but what they do when they get there and how that looks and how we actually manage Parliament and the unelected House of Lords, the elected Commons, all of it needs to be shaken up in completely different ways that aren't about which box we tick and how every 4 years. And the other thing, of course, is that the only way you'll get this changed is to put it into a manifesto and then win a first-past-the-post election. So, you've got to think about how you're going to win that kind of election before you can start thinking about how you're going to change the system.
She says change the system and she talks about the House of Lords. She looks at you, Daniel.
I did not, but I could have.
I'm up for reform. I'm happy to be reformed. If you can come up with a reform that people can agree on and that will satisfy the House of Commons and the government and everybody else.
The House of Lords doesn't need to be as big as it is, though, is it? Come on, I think, isn't it the second largest chamber in the world or something?
Yeah, but the House of Lords has a lot of people in it who don't attend, don't get paid, don't get involved because they become rather elderly and whatever. They can retire now. Some of them do, some of them don't. The number of people who are active in the House of Lords, given that it's a part-time house, you want a full-time house, you want a full-time upper house. I've got no problem with that either. But then you've got to pay people properly. You've got to give them a staff. You've got to give them proper officers. We don't have any of those things. So it's a part-time house and a part-time venture, and that means you like full-time equivalents is probably only half the actual number, and it's in terms of the people who actually put the work in. I defend it on those grounds.
I think it should be abolished because you're an exceptional.
You're fine.
Just leave that thought. I'll end your thought there. You say it should be abolished, and then I'm going to do a full stop there because we'll return to that debate on another day. I just want to read some of my viewers' responses out. Pat says, the system has worked for years, so why change it? Patricia, that depends who you vote for, I've got to say. Many people would say it hasn't worked for them. George says, why don't we introduce mandatory voting? Cool. How would you enforce that, though? What would you do? Don't you think the police or whoever it is have got better things to do with their time than going around your house and yanking you off your sofa and getting you down to the polling station? Don't know, you tell me. What else? Many people are writing in. Kathy's written in saying, my mum was born with a cleft palate. You are to be congratulated for talking about this. I have to say, Kathy, I wish more people understood cleft as a thing, and if they did, stigma would be removed. Many more children would have a better life as well. That's what I would say to that one. Thank you very much to my panel for their time, and thank you at home for yours. I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Further rain or showers expected in many places overnight and throughout much of Thursday. Some clearer spells in between, but it's going to stay cool. At the moment, low pressure is in charge. That low pressure is sitting towards the northwest of the UK. Wrapped around it are a number of occluded fronts. These providing the focus for longer spells of rain or heavier showers at times over the next 24 hours. So even after dark, we're going to see some showers continuing, and in fact in the far south and southeast of England through the evening, and then into North Sea coastal counties, perhaps some more prolonged rain at times. Away from there, showers continuing, perhaps some heavy downpours, particularly western coasts. But there will be some clear spells, and with the clear spells, it'll be a cool start to Thursday. Some sunshine around, but temperatures mostly 9 to 13 Celsius. Heavier rain for a time first thing across eastern parts of Northern Ireland could cause some issues in one or two spots. Otherwise, by the afternoon, it's just a mixture of sunny spells and showers for many. Hail and thunder possible in some of the livelier downpours, central and southern parts of the UK, and temperatures a little below par for the time of year, 18 to 22 Celsius. But there will be some sunshine out there, particularly around coasts, especially western coasts, I think. And then into the evening, the showers continue to rumble on for a time before eventually more widespread clear spells develop in many spots. And under those clear spells, it's going to be, again, another cool start